Hey guys, welcome back. This video is going to be a little bit different than our typical videos. Usually I go through an instruction of some sort of lesson, but this one's going to focus actually on the 6-6 practice. That 6-6 practice is on page 320, and it's problems number 1, 3, 5, and 21. And I think with the way our answers in 6-6, again, 6-6 being mostly about writing the equations of trend lines, I think with the variance we see in our answers, it can be confusing for a lot of students to work through the practice problems and know, am I doing the right thing? Am I getting the answer right? So to provide you some additional help, I wanted to go through problems number 1 and 5 from that 4-problem homework set with you. So please, unlike typical note taking, have out not only your notebook, but also have your textbook and turn to page 320. Okay, and we're going to go through problems 1 and 5 together. Again, the goal of this being to give you more confidence in writing your own equations for trend lines, even if they don't completely align with mine. So let's look at number 1 together. We're to find an equation of a reasonable trend line for each scatter plot. And we're looking at number 1, and it's a scatter plot of cable TV comparing the year to the number of subscribers to cable TV. And what we can see here, to kind of tie in what we talked about at the end of 6-6, is a very strong relationship, strong positive, right? The correlation coefficient of this scatter plot would probably be at about close to 1, probably in the 0.9 range. And we can see that as time has increased, so have the number of people who own cable television. Okay? But that's not our job. That's not what we're worrying about. What we're worrying about is writing the equation of a trend line. Now, number 1, I would actually argue, is a little bit more difficult than number 5, even though number 5 requires more work. Because to write the equation of a trend line, we know from 6-6 that number 1 is to draw a scatter plot. Well, they already did that for us, which is great. Now, we need to write the equation of a trend line, but step 2 before we get to writing the physical equation is to draw the trend line. And you can't really do this because of your textbook. You can't really draw a line in your textbook. I think that's what makes this one difficult. Now, I have the same graph in number 1 in your book here on the screen, recreated on the smartboard here. And that'll give me the luxury of being able to draw a trend line, okay? And again, when I'm drawing a trend line, my goal is to get about half the points above the line, half the points below. Though it's going to be pretty close here because it is such a strong correlation and they already almost look like they're in a line. But we're going to do our best, get some above the line and some below the line. Make this line is about as straight as I can. It's a little curvy. We could maybe do a little bit better here. Maybe I'll line up something like this. Okay. Some above, some below. Again, I'm kind of doing my best here. This is drawing by hand. Drawing equations of trend lines is not an exact science, which is why in statistics, a course you may take when you're older, has you find the line of best fit, that being the best trend line, and we use computer software to do so. Okay, so step 2 would be to draw the trend line. Again, you don't have to do this because you can't draw it in your book. So you jump to now step 3, which is identifying 2 points on the trend line. Okay, so maybe you've sketched an imaginary trend line through those points in your book. And now you're going to identify 2 points that you think fit on that trend line. And remember, they don't have to be table values, those table values being the red dots. Okay, they don't have to be table values. Can they be if the trend line goes through them? Sure. But again, they don't have to be. So looking at my trend line here, I want to pick some nice, neat numbers. Something that's going to work out pretty well. And I can see here that my trend line pretty much goes through this point, which is 92.55. And my trend line also goes through, let's see, what would be a good one? Maybe this one here. This would be 97, and it would be 64, 62 and a half. So this would be about 64. Okay. Again, maybe you're looking at your book, and I'll look at mine right now, and maybe you say, well, Mr. Carter, I think a better option would be 95, 56, and 95.60. Maybe that's what you go with. It doesn't matter to me. Again, do the best that you can with the information you have. So we've got 2 points. Again, those 2 points are not table values. They can be, but they don't have to be table values. Instead, what we're looking at is we draw the trend line and find 2 nice, neat points on our trend line. So now I'm going to write the equation of that trend line, and we're going to use point-slope form to do so. Again, if you're unsure of any of the steps I'm taking or they look really foreign to you, I would encourage you to go rewatch the 6.6 instructional video. What I'm going to do is I'll use the point 92.55 as my point. Now I need to find my slope, so I do y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And when I do that, I'm going to get 9 over 5, which is 1.8. So my slope is 1.8. And this is the equation of my trend line. And again, you're going to get different trend lines if you do this different times. In the previous in-person classes that I did today, I did this example and I got a slope of 2. In another class, I got a slope of 1.67. Again, you're going to have some variability here, but as long as you're in that 1.8, 2, 2.2, those are all fine values. If you start getting down to like 0.5 or like maybe up to like 10, again, that would indicate you're kind of off. But how do you know you're doing this right? Number one, you make the scatter plot correctly. Again, in that problem, it was already done for us. You draw that trend line. If it goes through table values, great, but don't make it, right? Make a good trend line is the priority. Then what we want to do after we make the trend line is identify 2 points on the trend line. Again, can be table values, but don't have to. Then we write the equation of that line. So now let's do the full thing. We're going to go through number 5 here together. And what number 5 asks us to do is graph the data in the table below for the attendance and revenue at theme parks. And then we want to find an equation for the trend line of the data. Well, I see the table has 3 different rows, and this is where I have to be very careful and I have to be good at reading my instructions. I need to graph the data in the table below for attendance and revenue. They also have a section for year, but am I going to focus on that? No, I'm not, because they don't ask me about year. So read closely. Well, I need to determine what's going to go on my x-axis and what's going to go on my y. And I'm going to put attendance on the x and revenue on the y for a couple different reasons. Number one, we see attendance is sitting on top of revenue in the table. Its row is on top, and that's a good indication that it should be on the x. But the other reason is attendance is the independent variable, and revenue is the dependent variable. Revenue is that's a label for billions. Revenue is the dependent variable. How do I know this? Well, when we think about a theme park, what's happening? The cost, the revenue, is dependent on how many people come, not the other way around, okay? We always want our independent variables on our x-axis. Again, we learned about that in previous sections, okay? So what I'm going to do now that I've kind of got my labels in order, what I want to do is I need to come up with a scale. Before I can ever start plotting points, I need to have a good scale. And you can notice I put those little squiggles, those breaks in the graph in, because I'm going to be skipping over some data. Now again, choose a scale that makes sense. My smallest attendance value is 260. Again, that's in millions. And my largest is 309. So I'm going to start here at 260. And what my gut says is, let's go up by tens. And you're like, tens? You're currently going up by 20s. You'll notice because I'm writing with a thicker pen that I am skipping some lines. So every grid line moving horizontally to the right is going up by 10. But I'm skipping a grid line just for the visual sake of my graph. Let's look at revenue on the y-axis. Our smallest value is 6.1 and the largest is 9.1. So going up by ones makes sense. Or really what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up grid line wise. I'm going up by 0.5s. But I'm just going to write the whole numbers. So I'm going to skip over grid lines. So 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But really we're kind of moving by 0.5s. Before we look at the grid line transition. And now that I have my foundation, I am okay to plot my points. So let's go ahead and do that. Again, not an exact science, but we can get pretty close here. My first stop being at 266.1, then 267 and 6.5, 275 and 6.8, 267 and 7.0, 280 and 7.4, 290 and 7.9, 300 and 8.4, 308.7, and 309 and 9.1. Okay, so step one, we wanted to draw a graph. We have done that. Now we need to write the equation of a trend line. So we progress on to step two, writing the equation of our trend line. But in order to do that, we have to have a trend line. And so we want that to be about above half of our data and below the other half. Maybe that's a little too high vertically. Maybe we go a little bit more like this. Again, this is just an estimate, so we're kind of doing the best we can. And again, let's pick some nice, neat, even points. Well, I pretty much, where this red dot should be a little bit over. That's 309 and 9.1. So we want that to be more like here. And I'm going to pick some nice points here. And I went through one of my table values, so maybe that's a good one to pick. 308.4. Now let's find another nice, neat point. Maybe I go here and I go, what's a good, nice point? We could do 275 and 7. And again, this is going to change depending on what you do. Again, your trend line might look a little different. Maybe it's a little bit more vertical than mine. Again, we're just doing the best we can here. And so now I'm going to write the equation of my line. Whenever I want to write the equation of a line with 2 points, I'm going to use point slope. So maybe I use 7 and 275. And then I need to find the slope. So I do 8.4 minus 7 over 300 minus 275. Or I'm sorry, yes, that is correct. And I get 0.6 over 25, which if we do in the calculator, comes out to be 0.024. 0.024. And off the cuff, I would say maybe that's a little bit lower than I would like it to be. I was hoping for more something in the 0.06 range, just because of the few other times I've made this trend line. But again, it's not going to be perfect, and we didn't use bad methods, right? Maybe in hindsight, my trend line could have been just the ever slightest bit more vertical. But again, we're drawing these by hand. We're doing the absolute best we can. And as long as we use good technique, we're going to be okay. How did we use good technique? We made a good scale, did a good job plotting our points, drew our trend line first, then picked some points on that trend line, and wrote the equation of a line out of them. Here, maybe I'll make this a little bit easier to read. And so we end up with the equation of a trend line. Again, we are computers, we're not going to be perfect, but this is the broad process of writing the equation of a trend line. Again, if a lot of this is confusing, please watch the 6.6 instructional video. Hopefully you find this helpful, and hopefully you feel well equipped to go work on number 3 and 21 on your homework. Thanks.